Yes, so at the beginning, of course, in spring, also in Vienna, no one had any projection of how the situation with Ukraine would develop. And positively, I'd say, both state and non-state actors quickly agreed to re-establish, I'd say, housing and other care structures for thousands of people. And NGOs who usually were contracted were also contracted this time. Still, in some parts, the stakeholders, both the NGOs and the municipalities, in my view, were not organized well enough, which meant, for example, that there were thousands of people queuing each day in one of the in front of the registration center, where there would have been other solutions. There was also no such thing as a central information hub or central information office, which is a thing that is always lacking in Vienna, to think about also ways of how do you say, giving out central information, somewhere, not decentralizing everything. And at the beginning, of course, everyone was very naively, happily welcoming this potential new workforce, as if people would start working tomorrow. And luckily, they were all white and Christian and female. And there was awareness, though, that both the legal difference and also the potentially quickly growing number of refugees might put the whole balance of the status quo out of balance. And so how's the situation now? We have, as Annika mentioned, we have 20,000 Ukrainian refugees in Vienna, an additional 10,000 refugees from other countries, asylum seekers in Vienna, 60,000 more or less in Austria, and still 60,000 more other asylum seekers also all over Austria. And at the moment we have, in August and July, we had between 10 and 15,000 asylum seekers per month arriving in Austria. The month before, it was always about 5,000, so we will have at least 100,000, if not more, asylum seekers by the end of the year. And this was also, I would say, the big surprise, that the numbers of other refugees, of asylum seekers, would rise so strongly this year. So we have higher numbers for refugees from Sudan, also North Africa, higher numbers than 2015 and 16. So by now, I'd say there's a mixed picture. There is, for now, I have to stress, for now, enough housing. There is support on different levels, psychological, for health in general. There's a specialized Ukrainian educational center. There's a lot of labor market integration support. And on the other hand, we are running out of housing soon, both on the organized level and on the private level. We still have the huge issue of the non-distribution of people, which means in the Austrian case, apart from Vienna, the other states do not accept refugees, basically very few numbers or not at all. In Vienna, as Vienna has such a high acceptance for refugees, there was basically a lockdown. The Vienna municipality does no more accept refugees from the first arrival center, from Traiskirchen. Which means that now Traiskirchen, which is managed by the federal state, is totally overwhelmed. And we have now people stuck in it's not even a registration, in the first arrival center. And at the same time, Vienna still accepting particularly vulnerable groups from Traiskirchen to Vienna, but not anybody else. And the federal state basically hopelessly looking at the states to help out with this crisis when it comes to housing and distribution. The communication, this is something I feel in my daily work is not transparent or not transparent enough. I can go into detail later if you like. The resources for the NGOs were were not augmented, were not raised as promised. A surprise was that there were many more people with special needs from Ukraine than we had accepted. So there's a huge number of people with different kinds of diseases, abilities, psychological difficulties than we expected. It was mentioned before that it's also totally unpredictable who will arrive from Poland in the future and from Ukraine, and also who will return back to Ukraine. From Poland, we'd seen over spring and summer that we saw people coming to Vienna who had planned to settle in Poland and were not happy with the situation there, or were ill and could not find enough health care in Poland. So we don't know how the situation would develop. Many women also came for abortion to Austria. As you know, the situation in Poland is very restrictive from this point of view. When it comes to people wanting to return or not, to me, it was interesting that there were some surveys conducted in Austria during spring and summer, and the results were over a few weeks extremely had an extremely high variety. So one result said that like only 10% of Ukrainians in Austria would like to stay, and 2 weeks later it was like 50% would like to stay in Austria. I think it was mainly due to the quality of the research, but in some part also due to aspects that Valeria mentioned before. So how do municipality and non-state actors work together in the situation or in changing situation? What was nice in Vienna is that there was an open agreement to treat Ukrainians and other asylum seekers regardless of their status. So if NGOs were contracted to open new consultancy services or housing for refugees, there was always looked at making it possible also for other refugees to use these new services. The Vienna municipality also still reacts quite quickly to the requirements that the NGOs have. So if I'm in a meeting and I hear NGOs saying that, or me speaking as an umbrella organization for the NGOs saying that we need more housing for LGBTIQ refugees from, I don't know, Afghanistan, there's a quick reaction, basically the NGO getting the contract to open up a new space. So the municipality is both aware and also afraid that the situation might get out of hand. The integration department is still not enough involved. So basically the integration department in Vienna is not very much involved with refugee questions in general. And what it does now for Ukrainians is basically a totally parallel structure to the whole refugee department. So what we know from each other is only through basically meetings on a personal level. There's no structural cooperation. And apart from not being enough in communication, they generally don't do enough for refugees, in my personal opinion. There's a lot of cooperation in Vienna and the will to cooperate, but sometimes I find it's a kind of pseudo-coordination, pseudo-cooperation and coordination. So I still have a sheet with me where there was the schedule for weekly meetings we have concerning Ukraine. And at the high point, I think I had 6 different commissions concerning Ukraine per week. And it was, I mean, it looked coordinated, but in the end, it was basically only confusing and out of hand, and no one needed so many meetings per week. So what are the most pressing challenges at the moment? A huge challenge is also keeping me busy at the moment is that the so-called registration for Grundversorgung, which means for the basic needs support when you arrive to Vienna, has a huge, how do you call it in English, a backlay. So, which means that between 1,000 and 4,000 people already arrived at the first service center are eligible for the basic support system, but did not receive their money. which means 4,000 people. The central social service claims by now it's 1,000, but last week it was still 4,000, or 2 weeks ago, live of the money they bring along from Ukraine. They're brought along from Ukraine. And also there's a transparency issue inside the city going on. I can give you detail later if you like. The lack of housing I mentioned before, the non-cooperation of the states, of the provinces. I think there's still a general refugee coordination missing. And we all, of course, are in need of a prognosis of prediction we don't have. And integration as a topic is neglected. I think what we learned from the previous wave is that there was more attention paid to the expertise of NGOs, definitely. There was now the knowledge and the experience of how to re-establish structures, which means housing, consultancy, and the like quickly. There was an interesting point also, there was an earlier connecting with helpers in Ukraine. Like there was the idea of, for example, Austrian psychologists to support Ukrainian psychologists in Ukraine, something which clearly never crossed their mind before when it was about Afghanistan or Syria. As for the quality of support, it is very nicely, highly differentiated support for many different needs. And also there was a very early preparation and establishment of different forms of psychological help. So this is something people learned clearly from 2015, that psychological support has to kick in early. I think a learning we all take, especially we take as an umbrella organization, that the position of NGOs has been strengthened because they were needed so much. And I think we've used well this window of opportunity to also establish structures that we've wanted to establish a long time. And what was a fear of the NGOs that luckily didn't come into truth was that in 2015 there were private companies taking over housing agendas for refugees. So imagine someone who just wants to make out of money out of housing refugees, and the support and the care refugees received there was of very poor quality. And so in the years after, the NGOs often felt that if they would not accept contracts, even with very little resources and with very bad conditions, someone who is not qualified would start housing and supporting refugees. But clearly, municipality and also the federal state learned from 2015 that this bears a lot of dangers. So there were this time no, let's say, non-qualified stakeholders in the game. So this is like the short version of the answers that came to my mind, and I can go into detail if you have questions.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I have one question. We have been exchanging days in Vienna, which is a social housing company in Vienna, that they are very happy about the collaboration of with the NGOs who rent out. Is that correct? The NGOs rent out social housing because the newcomers wouldn't be eligible to get social housing. And these rented places by the NGO then can be directed to various newcomers. Is that, how does that collaboration work? Because this is something which is very useful and important for our project.
The Ukrainians and the asylum seekers are not immediately eligible to, so to say, normal social housing. But what usually happens is that either the NGO, let's say the Diakonie or the Caritas, finds an object and rents out, let's say, a hotel, an old hotel or something with 200 places, and gets money from the municipality to run that house for refugees. And the other option is that sometimes also, let's say, another NGO like Caritas or NGO rents apartment apartments, and there's something that in Vienna is called Mobevo, which means let's say mobil betreutes Wohnen, which means people do live decentralized, but they are still visited by social workers and are taken care of and the like. And then there's a totally private housing that Valeria mentioned before, that you and I as a private person do offer support to a family. This whole aspect of housing has a lot of different aspects also in Vienna. For one thing, the NGOs were shocked how many people offered housing that have not been ready to offer housing before to people from other backgrounds, which is, of course, as an experience, really shocking. Yeah. Some NGOs even realized that their own NGO had obviously housing in petto that they were not ready to offer to Syrians or Afghans or people from other backgrounds. And then, as Valeria said, there's this whole issue that the civil society and private people, as always civil society, have been left alone with the question of how long do they play the host, let's say. Yeah? And of course, it's a different if it's 1 week or 1 year, or 1 month or 1 year.
Totally. Thank you, Caroline.